Well, I think it's 12 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. Welcome everyone online who is coming today to listen to our presentation about the do's and don'ts of landing the job, brought to you by the Office of Alumni Relations. I'm Rachel Anderson. I'm a graduate of the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. I'm also a member of the U Alumni Board of Governors, and I'm happy to welcome our panel here of University of Utah alumni and career professionals to share their experience in guiding job seekers to successful and satisfying employment. I'm going to start out with some introductions, and then we're going to go through some topics from start to finish on how to land the job. And then at the end, we will answer some of your questions that you've submitted or that you can submit during the presentation, and we'll be watching out for those on the video. So first, I'd like to introduce Charlotte Miller. Charlotte is also a fellow University of Utah Law School alumni member. She's also on the Board of Governors with me. Charlotte is a human resources professional with experience in both corporate and nonprofit environments. Charlotte, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your contribution to this discussion. Please share a little history of your work in HR, who you work for, what you do.
Okay, thank you. I actually started my law career working in law firms and as general counsel for some corporations who were headquartered in Salt Lake. And I fell into human resources because one of the CEOs asked me if I would head up the very large HR team at that company, which had been much larger than the legal team. And the company had about 7,000 employees. Since then, I have served both as the attorney for companies and the HR person for companies. And in the last 2 years, I have been the HR leader for the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association, which is a nonprofit that is funded by the county and the city. And the attorneys of the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association represent individuals who are indigent and have been charged with crimes. And we have about 165 employees. And I will tell you, whether you are working for 7,000 employees or 165 employees, you tend to have the same problems, or the same opportunities also, whether it's hiring people, helping people learn and develop, providing benefits, that whole range of information. And my law degree and my law experience has been very helpful, mainly in the area of what lawyers do or solve problems. And that's really what HR people do too also is solve problems.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Charlotte. Next, we have Brent Anderson. Ruined my own last name. He's an alum of the Eccles Business School MBA program at the University of Utah. Brent, glad to have you with us today. Tell us a little bit about your role as a talent acquisition professional and who you work for and what you do.
Sure. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brent Anderson. As mentioned, I did my MBA at the U, so go Utah. I am the Director of Talent and Compensation with Dyno Nobel, which most people have probably not heard of, but Dyno Nobel is one of the world's largest explosives companies. We have our headquarters here in Cottonwood Heights, Utah. So as the Director of Talent and Compensation, I oversee talent acquisition, talent development, learning and development, and compensation. Prior to that, I was the Director of Talent Acquisition at Dyno Nobel, so promoted not that long ago, actually. Previous to that, I worked in the talent acquisition function for IHG, which is the parent company of Holiday Inn, among other brands, and had other corporate experience beyond that. In total, I've had more than 15 years in talent acquisition, and what I hope to be able to provide from this session is some good feedback from the perspective of recruiters, right? What is it recruiters are looking to see from people? What are the questions you all might have to recruiters as you apply for jobs or as you think about making career changes? So I'm happy to be here today and hope everyone finds this useful.
Thanks so much, Brent. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Melissa Ceballos. She is also a University of Utah alum, and she is one of our U alumni career coaches. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing your experience and advice today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what you focus on as a professional career coach.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, happy to be here with everyone. I have a background in HR and similar to Brent, talent acquisition. I've spent 15 years working for a global company as the director of talent acquisition for a multi-state region. And then more recently moved over into, that was a transportation company. Now I've moved over into financial services and financial wellness programs, still in the arena of talent acquisition, actually hiring for nationally for positions, advisors across the country. So yeah, I absolutely love being, giving that perspective on the other side of the desk. Being in a recruiter role, you've come to learn that interviewing and the job search process is kind of an art, and it definitely can be developed, and you could obtain a lot of skills and best practices to help have a successful job search. So we're excited to share expertise today.
Thanks so much, Melissa. We're going to move in now to the main part of our presentation. This is going to be fairly fluid and flexible presentation today. We don't have PowerPoints. We're going to step through basically start to finish the process of landing a job. We're going to start with self-assessment, preparation, marketing yourself, document prep, and then the interview. And within each of those topics, I'll be calling on the various presenters to share their insight. And if any of the presenters have insight and I haven't called on you, just raise your hand, and we are really excited to hear all your feedback. And then when I'm done with that, we'll launch into the questions. So if you have any questions during the event, please send those via the chat feature. So we're going to start with self-assessment, and I'm going to cue this off to Brent to begin with. Can you help talk to us about determining the right career for you, and do you have any advice in that area?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's a critical first step in the job search process is trying to decide, where you want to be. And that's whether you're starting your professional life right out of school, or you're making a mid-career transition or rejoining the workforce after having been out of it for a while. So understanding what you're good at, what you'd like to do, and where you'd like to see yourself. The one thing I want to really highlight here, it's a lot of self-reflection, obviously, but I want to highlight that passion alone is not enough, right? You have to have fit for the job. If you don't go into it with that perspective, you're going to get a lot of disappointments and a lot of frustration. And I would encourage you, as you think about what do I want to do, focus on the day-to-day. Don't just think about the ultimate outcome or the ultimate task, right? Like take being an architect, for example, and that can sound really glamorous. And I'm going to go off and build skyscrapers and these great buildings and these great bridges and things like that. And that's fantastic, right? That's the ultimate end product. But the day-to-day work of an architect, they're sitting in front of a computer for 8 to 10 hours a day. They're looking at schematics. They're getting constant feedback and honestly criticism from their clients about the work that they're doing, right? So does that day-to-day work fit in with where you want to be? Not just the ultimate, oh, I'd like to, to build great things. So think about what you're good at, right? And not necessarily just professionally, but from your personal life. What are you good at? Are you really outgoing? If you are, maybe sales is a role you could be successful in. What environments do you thrive in? I talked about sitting behind a desk. Is that the kind of environment where you get energy and you feel empowered to do your best work? Or do you need to be out and about? Do you need to be in a job where you need to be standing up and moving around? And think about where you thrive and where you'll be happy on a day in and day out basis. The other thing related to this in terms of it is, online applications are so easy these days. I know it probably doesn't feel like that all the time, but relatively speaking, and thinking about the transition of how things have gone over the last couple of decades, it's so easy to apply for a job online. You can kind of take that, why not, right? I'll just go ahead and just apply for that job. It'll take me 5 minutes. Why not? That's okay. But where I'd ask you to kind of put a little thought is when you're thinking about doing that with an organization you really want to be a part of, if you're applying for multiple jobs, the talent acquisition teams, even for billion-dollar companies, which I've been a part of, are relatively small. It's the same people. It's a single applicant tracking system. So they can go in and see every job you've ever applied for. And even though you might be qualified for this job and really good fit, if they see you've got 8 or 10 or 12 other applications in the last year or so that you're not a good fit for, they're going to be really scared off by your application. So that's where I go back to thinking about the fit and making sure it is in fact a good fit.
That's a really good point. And I think that's interesting for people to know, because I know there's this sense of, oh, just give it a try. There's nothing to lose. But maybe to be a little bit more discerning in what you apply for is an important thing to think about as well. I'm going to launch it over to Melissa now to continue this talk about self-assessment. And why don't you share your thoughts on the importance of self-assessment, knowing your strengths, and identifying transferable skills?
Yeah. And I would just like to echo what Brent said, because I think the two things I took out of what he said is what energizes you, and talking about, you know, being, as you said, Rachel, discerning and really thoughtful about the jobs you're applying for. Because if you go into an interview and someone asks, like, where have you been applying? What types of opportunities are you looking for? And the response is, I've applied to hundreds of jobs. It's kind of like, well, what do you want to do? And so you really have to be thoughtful about that. And again, there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done before you even get in that interview chair to be able to answer those types of questions. And knowing who you are, knowing what your unique abilities are, and where you are best, you know, slated to be in an organization. You know, this could come through a number of things. What have you typically been, you know, kind of accustomed to, not accustomed to, but more like, what are you kind of a magnet to? What do you always find yourself gleaning towards, you know, in any role or responsibilities you've had growing up as a young child, while you're in high school, in college, throughout your career? Are you a leader? Are you someone who's, you know, more of a back of the office type individual where, you know, I don't want to be a front person. I don't want to speak. I just want to do the work. Or, you know, like Brent said, if you're really good and outgoing in doing, you know, things where you need to network, and you know, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And identifying those things can really help you align with what types of positions to apply for. So as you're going through a career exploration process, you know, even in just researching companies and researching job descriptions, as you read through those, as you read on websites and learn about company mission statements and philosophies, our job descriptions and roles and responsibilities and who we're looking for and what would make you a great fit for this company. Does that resonate with you? When you read that, do you get excited and envision yourself working for that company? And doing that work ahead of time, I guarantee will provide you and set you up for much better success as you're going through that process. So real quick, just to hit on the transferable skills, I think it's really, really important to dig deep into your experiences. And again, what you've naturally migrated towards in terms of, like, I love group projects, or I love, you know, working as an individual where I can manage my own time and be, you know, am I creative? Am I more of a take direction type of person? And understanding that, okay, so in my past, when I was in college, I was in a lot of extracurricular activities, or I did student government, or I did things as a student athlete where it's like, okay, in those positions, even though that technically wouldn't classify as work experience, you're gaining a lot of skills and capability and experience that can be very transferable to the work, you know, that you would be doing in your profession. So, you know, if you've been in roles where you've been very influential in getting ideas across, maybe you are fit to be a great salesperson. Or if you're more of an analyzer and you get in and you like to do the research, maybe research and development is a good role for you. So again, thinking about what you've done in the past, whether it's in your professional work, in your volunteer work, or your extracurricular activities, think about what you've done and what you've accomplished and how that could transfer over.
Thank you, Melissa. And I agree. I think that from the perspective of an employer, and I've done a very small amount, especially compared to you three, for the company that I work for, but you can kind of tell who has a sense of themselves and knowing where they want to be and what they are, and that confidence. If you sense that the person just doesn't even know what they're doing, you kind of don't have a lot of confidence in that person. So that self-assessment that we start out with is I think important to putting your best foot forward to begin. Let's move on to a similar topic, the preparation, preparing to apply for roles. I'm going to start this one off with Charlotte. Can you talk to us about preparing for a role, researching the organization, maybe even finding out who you're going to be interviewing with, understanding the org chart, those kind of things?
So when I'm on an interview panel, or I've arranged for a person to come for an interview, the people who do better are the people who really know about the organization. So as soon as someone starts asking questions that indicate they don't even know what the organization does, they lose people and that person does not get an offer. But so I tell everyone, at least look at the website so that you have a sense of what the organization is doing. And even in the law world that happens. I mean, the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association represents people who are indigent, and lawyers generally, whether you've practiced in criminal law or not, know that those are appointed to you by the court. And we had somebody ask once, well, how do you get your cases? And there was just this silence because you're kind of thinking, well, really, you don't know that. So you should know some basics about the organization. And if people ask me who they're going to be interviewing with, I'm happy to share that list. Now, sometimes it might change, but only the time I give you the list and the time of the interview for various reasons. But there's nothing wrong. In fact, I encourage it. Look up the names of the people you're interviewing with so you know who they are. You know your audience. Understanding your audience is really important in terms of who you're speaking with. And then sort of understanding your org chart goes along with that too, so that you know how this position that you're applying for, how does it fit in the organization? Because the more you can talk as if you belong in the organization, the more likely somebody who's interviewing you is going to visualize you as part of the organization. Your goal in that interview is for it to seem like you belong there. And the more you understand how it works, the more it will feel like you just belong there. And I think that helps quite a bit. If you know anybody in the organization, please make an effort to talk to them and learn. Also, if that person can talk to others about you, there are times when I wouldn't have interviewed somebody because their resume may not have looked like a perfect fit. But if somebody in my organization said, you know, this is a person you should interview, I'll do it. And so never miss that opportunity to use people who know who you are and know what kind of work you do to have them share that. Don't be shy about asking that.
We had a question come in while you were speaking that I'm going to present to all three of you, and I'd be very interested to see if you have different perspectives on this. The question was, is it appropriate to contact the company to ask who is doing the hiring? And I'm going to take this to mean, you know, if you don't know anyone at the company, is it okay to just kind of cold call or try to figure out who's the right person to talk to? Start with Charlotte. What is your perspective on that?
People do that, and it never bothers me. I let them know. Sometimes it's easier if you send an email, if you can figure out maybe who to even email, because you might have a better chance of getting a response than if you leave a voicemail. But people call and ask me that, and I don't mind helping them.
What about you, Brent? What is your thought on that question?
Yeah, I mean, building on that, I mean, do a little sleuthing, right? Try to be a little precise before you reach out in the communication. Obviously, anyone in recruiting is a good fit. HR can be. If you can figure who you think based on LinkedIn, who you think the hiring manager likely is, it's not going to hurt you. One thing I say, it may not help, but it's not going to hurt.
Melissa, do you have anything to add?
No, I would agree. I would just again, what Brent said, do a little research and try to navigate it yourself. And again, connect on LinkedIn, find out who works for that organization, search job titles. And a lot of times you can narrow it down. But at the end of the day, if you just want to hit the easy button and call and say, who does the hiring for your company, I would have no problem with that.
Great.
Rachel, I would add the one thing that I have gotten emails that just say, I'm looking for any job you might have in the organization. And that doesn't come across that well. Be more precise, as Brent said.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I'm going to turn the time over a little bit to Brent to talk about continuing with this idea of preparation. You shared with us, as we were preparing for this presentation, some interesting thoughts about how people sabotage their own applications and perhaps even their interviews. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, it happens all the time. So a couple of things. One thing I want to address, just kind of, it's along this lines, but it leads into some of the things I said earlier. Well, yes, don't apply for every job, but also don't make yourself feel like you need to tick every box in the listed qualifications, right? If you've got a handful or more than a few, go ahead and apply. This is especially true of women, because, looking at the research, women tend to apply when they're fully qualified for a role, whereas men will apply if they tick a single box. Of course, that's a generalization, but it's true. So I just encourage you, if you feel like you're reasonably qualified, make sure that you're applying. Don't hold yourself back because you don't have every single requirement that is listed. If you feel like you've got most, or at least the most important ones, go for it. So as far as, how people sabotage their applications, it can vary a little bit based on the company. A lot of companies will reject resumes that have photos on them. So they'll full on refuse to even consider that candidate. They don't tell you that, but if it comes through, company I work for, a large company I work for, if your resume is on the photo, it ends up in the trash, and that's that, right? So I'd encourage you not to put your resume photo or a photo on your resume, but I would encourage you to make sure that you have a professional photo on your LinkedIn profile, because the reality is, if they're seriously interested in you, good chance both the recruiter and the interviewees might go to LinkedIn and do a little cyber stalking. To that point also is your social media. Consider your social media when you're applying for jobs. If you have content on there that you wouldn't feel very comfortable with everyone seeing, make all of those private, right? Because again, decent chance that that might be searched. As far as the interview, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they over-answer questions. Once you feel like you have answered the question, stop. And that can be particularly difficult in a video interview, a phone interview, or even a pre-recorded interview, which are becoming more and more common, but it's also true face-to-face. If you've answered the question, stop. Typically, when people keep talking, they tend to contradict themselves or undermine the answer that they previously gave. And, obviously that's not helpful. Make eye contact. If you're doing a video interview, try to look at the lens on the camera you're talking to. But if you're face-to-face, obviously make eye contact. If it's more than one person, don't just lock into a single person, or don't just lock into the person who asked the question. You want to give them the most attention, but you want to work around the room and make sure you're trying to connect with all of those individuals. And then the last thing I would say, as far as people sabotage themselves, is they're not themselves in their interview. Obviously, you want to be, one of the best versions of yourself during an interview. You're trying to sell yourself, but it doesn't help you, and it does not help the organization if you pretend to be something that you're not. You'll get in day one, they think they've hired something and you're something different. The organization is going to be disappointed. You're going to be disappointed. So make sure you stay authentic and be yourself in that interview process.
I have two follow-up questions to that. First is just out of my own curiosity. Why would a company automatically reject photos? What is about that they don't like?
It potentially opens them up to some discrimination. So they're what are called protected classes based on a lot of characteristics. And when there's a photo on there, that can openly allow them to be more discriminatory, and it could put them at risk. Okay.
My second question, this one actually came through on the chat. You mentioned, maybe still apply for jobs even if you don't fill every checkbox of what they're looking for. How should you prepare to address those areas that you maybe don't meet if you do apply?
I don't want to dominate the conversation. Charlotte, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I just interviewed a person in that situation. And she's a lawyer, but she's never practiced criminal defense law, which is all we do at our organization. But she had been on active duty in the military overseas. And during her first year of law school, her husband was on active duty in Afghanistan while she had her 3 children at home. So there was a lot about the way she talked about that made us think, she could probably do anything she wanted to do if she put her mind to it, because those were pretty extraordinary circumstances. And what was more important is she brought to us, she was able to describe some skills she had in her past employment. She had been a press officer for the military. So as a press officer, she had to tell stories. She had to do public speaking. She had to make quick judgments. She had to learn about people. And that's basically what you do as a trial lawyer. You tell stories, and you tell stories that put people in the best light possible. And so because she was able to talk about that skill set, we could then envision her translating that skill set to a whole new area of practice. And I thought she did an excellent job of that. And so that's what my takeaway from that would be: think about what skills you have and explain how those skills would work and be to your advantage in the new position you're looking for. When she was asked what would be her best attribute, she said, I bring calm to a situation, which is absolutely true of what you need as a trial lawyer. So I would just tell everybody to think about that. And Brent's right. Women often think, if I haven't done that exact job, they won't hire me. But instead, think of the skills you do have based on what you have done and really be able to articulate those skills well. Practice talking about them.
Do you have anything to add to that, Brent?
No, I think that's it. Be prepared to answer questions related to areas where you have gaps. So don't let that surprise you. Have a prepared response, but also don't let it intimidate you. It is so rare to find a candidate who ticks every single box. So just go in there knowing that the other candidates who are in the interview process are going to have different gaps than you do, and don't let yourself get psyched out by that.
Thank you. It looks like Melissa is having some technical difficulty, so I'm going to move on past topic she was going to talk about, but we're moving into the next thing, which is marketing yourself. And I'm going to ask Brent for you to continue talking here. In terms of marketing yourself, I want you to speak a little bit from the recruiter angle. When you're out there looking for candidates, it might be a little different than when we're talking about a candidate out there looking for jobs. So what advice do you have? What are recruiters looking for? How can you position yourself well online to be found by recruiters, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so great question. I'll touch on some of the things I think that Melissa was going to talk about, but there's really two kinds of candidates in our world. There are what we call active candidates. Those are people who are going online, seeing the job postings, applying for the role. Those are great. They're easy, fantastic, right? But then there's also what are considered passive candidates. Those are people who are not applying for our jobs, but they maybe have the skills that we need. So those are the people where we're proactively going out and trying to find those people. So you think about LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn it's the primary tool that the organizations I've been with use to try to proactively find those passive candidates. But there's other tools as well. But one of the things about LinkedIn, if you have a LinkedIn profile and you're looking for a job, I would strongly recommend you click the box that says open for work. The reason for that is the way recruiters, it's a separate tool called LinkedIn Recruiter that recruiters can take advantage of, and you can sort candidates. So you put in the job title you're looking for, you put in the keywords, you put in the degree, all the things you want, and it'll pop in, X number of candidates. And sometimes that's a really large number. So you have a chance to use what are called spotlights, where we can filter it down to the people who are saying that they're open to work. The reason you should do that if you are looking to make a change is because, recruiters only have so much time, and we want success and we want it as quickly as we can get it. And the people who have that are much more likely to respond, right? And that's the reality. They're people who are more likely to respond. They're more likely to be interested. They're more likely to interview and get hired. And so we have a strong advantage for that. One thing just to share on that, for those of you who are currently employed, I want to be really clear. A recruiter with the same organization cannot see that you have listed yourself as open to work. So while I can see all the people outside of my organization, I cannot see the people within my organization, which is great. The other thing I would ask on LinkedIn is respond to people, to recruiters when they hit you up. Even if you're not interested, please respond. If response rate falls below 15%, you go into what we call LinkedIn jail, where you're not allowed to send candidates emails or messages through that system. So a couple other things when you're thinking about marketing yourself, the resume format actually matters. I strongly recommend you always to submit your resumes in Word or in PDF. Reason for that is if I don't have the type of software application that you're using for your application, I may not be able to open your resume. And if I cannot open your resume, I can't consider you for the role. Leverage your LinkedIn connections. We talked about this a little bit, but proactively reach out to companies, people at companies you think you'd like to be with down the road. And don't just get connected and never do anything, right? That's not good enough. If you want to really build the relationship, you should, look at the things they post, comment on them, share them, ask them questions, and really use that networking. One of the questions that came up in the pre-questions were, how do I apply for a job that's out of state or out of the area? The reality is a lot of recruiters, they see someone who's outside that area and, they don't need to look at them, they're going to just ignore that person. I mean, that's just the reality. It's not across the board, but that's often the case. So what I would recommend is, if you do not require relocation, meaning you don't need the company to pay to relocate you, I would recommend that you put your location as that location, right? Just give some generic, Salt Lake City, Utah, Atlanta, Georgia, whatever the case may be. Just throw that on there, because then you'll get in consideration. If they're interested in you, you'll get that first contact, and then you can explain the situation to the recruiter or to the hiring manager, and you're already in the door, as opposed to just getting ignored right off the bat. If you do require paid relocation, that's a slightly different animal. You need the company to help cover the costs of moving you to wherever it is they want you to be. Then I would just recommend you put you're open to relocation right there at the top of your resume, as well as on your LinkedIn profile. I talked a lot about LinkedIn, and that is something that we use frequently, but Indeed has a resume database as well. ZipRecruiter does. All of the state of Utah, for example, has a resume database. Make sure your resumes on those sites are up to date, because recruiters are absolutely searching them every single day. Include the pertinent keywords for the work that you've done, but you want to make sure everything stays up to date. Don't let it lapse if you're in the job market.
I think that's absolutely fantastic advice that most people, I think, don't realize what it looks like from the other side, and to know that you guys are actively out there looking through these resumes, and that it really is important to have your presence on the internet up to date. Melissa, I'm going to hit it back to you and ask you, you were going to talk to us a little bit as well about how you recommend people use LinkedIn to their advantage.
Yeah, sorry, I left for a slight minute. So LinkedIn can be such a great marketing tool for job candidates, and really, sorry if I'm being redundant at all, but I do believe that a lot of recruiters are on LinkedIn and actively looking for prospective candidates for their organizations. And LinkedIn is such a great tool, because obviously it allows someone to dive in and really look at someone beyond a resume, right? So LinkedIn is a tool that you can go in, and although it's not recommended, nor do I condone recruiters looking on LinkedIn to see someone visually, to look at that platform for their professional experience, for their volunteer experience, for even recommendations that are made on LinkedIn from previous employers or colleagues or, mentors or people you've worked with in the past. I would use that tool to your advantage, because as they're going through and they're sifting through and they're trying to get information about you as a candidate, that's something that I always go to. What is being said about this person, and how have they performed in previous companies, and what does a past supervisor say about them? And it's so easy to access that on LinkedIn. I would just make sure, again, have a professional picture, make sure that you're up to date in your work experience and in chronological order. Obviously, a summary about you, so you're really highlighting and promoting yourself and your passions and your skill sets and who you want to align with. So much you can use on LinkedIn to help you in your job search.
Awesome. We got a question from the chat that I'm going to present to all three of you again, and it actually leads really well into our next topic, which is document prep anyway. A lot of these topics kind of meld together, so it's hard to separate them out. But the question was that I was taught at the business school that your resume needs to be in Times New Roman, small font. I have also been told that if you are in marketing, you should make your resume more creative. What is your opinion on that? I'm going to start with Charlotte. What is your opinion on format? And now, as an attorney myself, I understand that attorneys have their own specific quirks and want it to be very boring. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, in my past life, I've hired for lots of positions, whether it's, marketing or CEOs, housekeepers, the whole range. I would say you never want to make your resume so creative it's quirky, but you do want to make it clear and clean and easy to be able to see what you've done and when. And sometimes people have a hard time with that part, but I wouldn't overdo it in terms of going, too far any direction. I don't care if it's Times New Roman. I've never cared this as far as I can ever think of. But you also don't want it like in, some strange type like crayon. So make it so it's easy to read. You can quickly identify what the person's done, what they want, what their education is. And you can easily click off the boxes for the requirements for the position. That's what's important to me.
Thank you. And I'm going to let Melissa and Brent talk about that when we discuss their parts of this topic of the document prep. You guys are already talking on this topic, and I think it involves that. So I'll let you guys take that as part of your presentation. I know I'm not a presenter here, but I'm going to add my little 2 cents here for what it's worth. I originally started out with a degree in communications. So I was in the communications role, and I still kind of participate in my college's helping them out, their seniors, with interview prep and stuff like that. And a lot of the people in the communications field are going into public PR and really creative type roles. And I look at their resumes and it just like, oh my gosh, because they have like these super creative, like I designed this logo and all this stuff. And it's so foreign to me. So I'm just like, I think that every field maybe has different expectations, and hopefully you understand a little bit what the expectations are for your field. Now, as far as the Times New Roman point particularly, it's funny that you say that, because I also grew up on Times New Roman and thought and especially among lawyers, and especially among lawyers of older generations, like that is the be all end all. Like if you write anything outside of Times New Roman, you're like, going to get rejected. However, these same communications folks that I work with from my undergrad college, they're teaching people now, like, you absolutely do not use Times New Roman. It is outdated. I've heard people say it shows that you just don't care. And I think that's so funny because, yeah, it's like, to me in the lawyer world, it's like the standard font to use. But apparently in some areas, the people are moving away from that. And I've heard some say that they would reject a resume that has Times New Roman because it shows that you're outdated. I think that's probably not very true. I think the biggest thing would just to be clear, but yeah, it's a debate we're not going to solve today, but know your audience. Not to take up too much of that time, to continue on the discussion of document prep, I'm going to hand it back over to Melissa for a moment. You're going to talk about customizing your resume, how to align with the job description, and ATS keywords. I don't even know what that is. So can you please explain that to us?
Okay, I'll make it really clear and concise. There is no cookie cutter resumes. There is no one-stop shop. You have to customize a resume for every job you're applying for. And reason being is that, particularly in larger companies, an applicant tracking system is used. So ATS is an applicant tracking system. So it's technology, it's artificial intelligence that's recognizing where you're taking your job description and your resume and aligning the keywords. So how many times a particular keyword is in a job description, they're looking for how many keywords that match that job description in your resume. So again, it's technology. There's no human component to that. So you're going to get knocked out of the process if your resume is not customized to that company job description. So really simple terms, really dissect that job description, read it through time and time again, ensure that you do meet the qualifications, ensure that you do use a wordsmith or use, words that align with, and it has to be exact. You can't use synonyms. You have to find the exact words. So if it's looking for a sales director, you want to have a sales director in your resume, not a sales manager, because the applicant tracking system won't recognize that. So again, point being, just make sure when you read that job description, really match that and use those identical words to put on your resume. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I'm taking away, definitely don't use a boilerplate resume. It should be modified to every job that you're applying for.
Yes.
Okay.
And save every resume you have and title it with your name and the company you're applying for. So when they want to access it or you get called in for an interview, you can go on your computer and pull up that document, and don't get those mixed up, because
That's
time
smart.
and time recruiter, I've had someone send me a resume titled, for another company. And it's kind of a turnoff. It's like, okay, your attention to detail is lacking and you did not give me the respect, to address the company that I'm working for. And it just shows your lack of really wanting to work for that specific company.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, where they forget, they're clearly using a boilerplate cover letter or whatever, and they forget to change one of the names of the companies, and yeah, total turnoff. Brent, what can you add to us? In particular, I'm interested to hear what you think about cover letters, when they add value and when they don't. And also anything else you have to add about customizing your application, resume do's and don'ts.
First thing, going back to echo what Melissa said, a lot of applicant tracking systems, which is the recruiter side, right? You click apply through Indeed or whatnot, your resume ends up on an applicant tracking system. And a lot of organizations, and more every day, are using some version of artificial intelligence to do a first pass screening of candidates. And if you don't hit a certain set percentage of those keywords or those requirements, a human being will never see your resume. So customization really is critical. As far as cover letters, I did a little digging on this, and 18% of hiring managers consider them to be important to the process. That's according to Monster. I feel like that number's artificially high, to be honest with you. Most recruiters are not going to look at your cover letter. A hiring manager might if you make it that far, but the reality is most recruiters are not going to look at them. The terrifying reality is typically they'll spend less than 30 seconds looking at your resume the first time, right? I mean, it's a really quick pass to see if you meet the qualifications or you don't. If it's listed as a requirement, you should absolutely write a cover letter, no question about it. But otherwise, just fill in the blanks, to your resume. Your resume should be all the information that is required on the cover letter. If you do write a cover letter, though, it needs to have something to it. It shouldn't just be a regurgitation of what your resume is, right? Go a little bit deeper, explain things a little bit deeper. The other time you might want to use a cover letter is when you do have something on your resume that doesn't make sense, right? You've got a large gap in employment, or you're making a dramatic shift from one career type to another career type. Explain, the why behind that and why you feel like your skills are transferable, as was mentioned earlier. Thinking about the document, the resumes, white space is your friend. Do not play with the margins. People will stretch those out high and low, and it makes it difficult for recruiters to read them. If it looks clunky, it kind of, it has a negative impact on, your actual work experience. Even though those things are not related, it really truly does. I don't think the font matters at all. I've never had a hiring manager complain about the font that it came in. So, standard fonts are just fine. Never use reverse chronological order on a resume. We'll see that a lot. Again, those recruiters are only giving it a few seconds. And if they're not paying close attention, they might see that first job out of high school, and they'll think that's your most recent position and you're declined, when in reality, you're a chemical engineer with 20 years of experience, right?
Maybe you shouldn't be putting your high school job on there if you're already a chemical engineer.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't, but some do. Don't include your GPA. We see that a lot on resumes. Unless you're right out of school, I would encourage you not to include your GPA. If you've graduated from college, I would encourage you not to put your high school diploma on there. Those are taken for granted. Put your phone number and your email address at the top of your resume. I'd encourage you to actually put it at the top of each page, but definitely at the top of the resume. It's surprising how many candidates will leave off those critical pieces of information. Sometimes they'll provide neither, which, you can go into where they applied and you can dig it up if you're the recruiter, but that's asking them to do more work. And in all honesty, it starts annoying them, right? And it's that attention to detail thing. Proofread your resume, right? Proofread it more than once. Have a friend proofread it, because sometimes you'll read what you think it says instead of what it really says. Typos can be an absolute killer. I've absolutely seen hiring managers who will reject, right? This is an application. This is this person's brand, and they can't even spell this word correctly, and they'll just reject them out of hand. So proofread it. And then length, right? 2 pages is about the longest a resume should be, unless you have a lot of really good work experience, something that really warrants going into a longer resume. You don't ever want to be just over, right? You don't want to be 1 page and a couple of lines, so make sure you make it fit in a way that looks good. And then as far as like the bullets and things like that, wherever you can quantify, right? Improved overall customer satisfaction. Well, that sounds great, but it also doesn't mean anything, right? If you can put a number to that, it'll add a little bit of heft.
These are really great specific points. Yes, I was just going to say to Charlotte or Melissa. Melissa, do you have anything to add? Because this is such a meaty topic.
Add on that that Brent said in terms of length of a resume. I know that's always a challenge, especially if you're experienced and you have a lot of experience to showcase. I would think the best thing for a rule of thumb to use in how to condense a resume is keep in mind that an employer doesn't necessarily care what you've done for other employers. They care what you're going to do for them. So if you really want to customize that resume and think about the experience that's going to be relevant for the position you're applying for, cut out anything that you've done that's not applicable, right? Even though you're very proud of working for this company and the accomplishments that you've had, if it's not applicable to the role you're applying for and it, exceeds a 2-page resume, just cut it out.
Do you have anything to add, Charlotte?
Brent's comment about really having it be applicable is important. And, it's never mattered to me that somebody was an Eagle Scout. So you can take that off the resumes, and I see it a lot. But that's something you could leave off. It doesn't have anything to do pretty much with anything I've ever hired for, and it would give you more space.
Awesome, thank you. The last topic we're going to discuss before I go into final questions, we do have a number of questions that were submitted before the event, so I want to make sure to get to those. And also as a reminder, you're free to send questions during the discussion as well through the chat feature. But yeah, this last topic is the interview. So I think this one is probably going to be just as meaty as what we just discussed with the document prep. I'm going to start with Melissa and give us your thoughts about, we have time for each one of you. So Melissa, why don't you start us off with preparing for the interview and what your recommendations are during, during, and post interview.
Okay, hit all of those.
Yes.
Okay. Phases of the process. And again, it's important that you spend time in each of those, because it's not a matter of just showing up for the interview and hoping it's successful. It's the pre-work that you put into it. It's the research that you've done on the company. It's the self-assessment that you've done on yourself to make sure that you're the right fit for that organization and why you'll be an asset to that company. It's, really customizing the resume. It's, investigating and researching who the hiring managers will be or who you'll be meeting with. So having all that prep work will allow you to go into that interview with confidence. So as much as time and energy you can put in before you even get to the interview is going to help you. During the interview process, it's ensuring that you're prepared, that again, you go in knowing exactly what you've applied for, knowing what the company's mission is or what their culture is like, to some extent. It's understanding, and this is all going to be understood through asking questions. So when you get in front of someone, ask as many questions as is applicable, and I think asking questions shows a high level of interest on the candidate's part, and really being able to say like, wow, they've been really thoughtful and they sold me on really wanting to work for this company, versus someone that comes in and the first question they ask is, well, what is the position I'm applying for? Can you tell me a little more about it? Like, that just doesn't settle well. So during that process, again, if it's, a 1-step process to a 3 to 5-step process, making sure you're asking those questions, really knowing like what's important to you. Not asking about pay, not asking about benefits necessarily on the first interview, but understanding like, okay, why is this a great company to work? And what's important to you as a candidate? Do you want to work for a company that has great diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? Do you want to work for a company that's philanthropic and is involved in the community? Do you want to work for a company that has great promotional opportunities? If so, then those are the questions you need to be asking throughout the interview process. And so again, just being very transparent and asking questions so you're staying in the know of what can I expect going forward? What's the next step in this process? And then post-interview, again, it's all about follow-up. It's all about, okay, how do you thank the hiring manager for their time? I'm old-fashioned, and I still think in the day of digital and email, we're inundated with emails every day. So an email's great, but a handwritten card is, you know, a little extra touch. It's going to land on a desk. I always open a handwritten card every time. So I think it's more noticed. So doing that follow-up, reiterating that you appreciate their time and you are so appreciative of what you were able to learn during that interview, and restate why you think you'll be great addition to that company.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to make sure to have time, but we're going to finish this topic. Charlotte, can you talk to us about your insights on the interview, making sure how you know how to use the technology, practicing, all those things that that you have advice to give about the interview?
Certainly. You know, one thing I would say overall is just remember the whole time you're at the organization, whether you're there in person or online, you are being interviewed. There's a great story from Zappos, who hires for culture. And they would fly people in to be interviewed. And they are in Nevada. And they would have somebody go pick the people up and bring them to the interview. They would have a day-long interview, and then the person would take them back to the airport. The very first person who they always ask about the candidate from the interview panel was the driver of the van. They wanted to know what the driver of the van, you know, how the person treated them, what they asked, what they talked about on the way from the airport, on the way back to the airport. And I've actually tried to use some of that when I've interviewed people in terms of walking them around the facility, because the actual movement of walking around helps get rid of some of the nervous energy of the candidate, and it helps them relax, but it also helps you talk more casually and get a feel more for the person. So just remember that the moment you walk in the door and you greet the receptionist is interviewing you also. And Melissa, you're absolutely right. People need to be prepared with good questions. Also make sure as the candidate you listen, so that if that question has just been answered, you don't then ask it. So really be present in the moment, but come prepared with some good questions and practice in advance. There's nothing wrong with, you know, whether it's a friend or a family member, to sit down and practice about some of the things you're going to say. It really helps to learn how to talk in complete sentences so that your complete thoughts are communicated, and to look people in the eye, as Brent said earlier. Make sure your sentences have a subject and a verb, and they have a point, that you don't interrupt yourself and then go off in another direction, because you may be brilliant, but then nobody is capturing the articulation of what you have to offer to them. Make sure you know how to use the technology. I mean, I guess this last year that's been more prevalent, but people are doing, you know, Zoom calls and Zoom interviews, no matter whether we have COVID or not. And I just had an experience with a candidate who, as much as I let them know how to prepare, what format we were using, and to practice and make sure both the video and the audio worked, it was completely unsuccessful. And it was pretty much his own user error. And that didn't work well for that particular position. And sometimes there are other problems that nobody can control and you get a do-over, but you have to at least come to the interview with some preparation of how to use the technology. So I would just encourage people to practice.
Awesome, thank you. Brent, I'm gonna have you speak now, and I specifically want you to focus on some of the questions of how to address during an interview, the question, what are your salary requirements, for instance, and also talk to us about negotiating offer packages, those two things. And before you talk, I just want to note that we did receive a direct question that's sort of on this topic, which is why I'm going to field it to you specifically. The question was, do you have advice for the final stage of the interview process in negotiating salary and your preferred work schedule, such as if you're a parent and you need more flexible hours? So all that I just threw at you, can you speak to those items?
Yeah, everybody's favorite part of the interview process is what are your salary requirements, right? So just really quickly, you know, the question is asked for two reasons primarily. One is to save time, right? If the job pays $80,000 a year and you're looking for $130,000 a year, there's just not a fit, right? That's not a gap that can be bridged. And so save everyone's time in the process and move on to other candidates. The other reason is to set an expectation, right? To get a feel for, okay, when we do want to offer this person, where are they thinking? And that may not impact what the offer is going to be. A lot of organizations like mine, have job banding where roles are slotted into certain locations, and there's some wiggle room there, but for consistency reasons, it's more or less going to be the same for others in similar roles. But they still want to make sure, when I make this offer, how is that going to be received by the candidate? In terms of when the discussion, I typically encourage candidates to hold off on asking that question. I mean, if I'm talking to my friends about what they should do, right, you want to let the employer broach that subject typically. And, those who, in any negotiation, those who have more information have more leverage. Feel free, if you're not comfortable sharing what you're, if you're comfortable with it, share it, right? It makes recruiters' lives a lot easier. But if you're not comfortable, ask the question back at them. Where are you looking to be on this role? What are you looking to pay? What is your budget? What is your salary range? They may not answer, but it doesn't hurt to ask the question. As far as the negotiation part, once you get into that stage, and I would strongly encourage you, do not jump ahead in that process. Wait until it comes about naturally. Don't start negotiating before they've made you an offer. Candidates will do that. You do not want to do that. It really hurts your chances. But when you do start negotiating, everything is on the table, right? You talked about work flexibility. You talk about vacation time. You talk about all these other things. It should be a single negotiation. What you don't want to do is have a back and forth on salary, get to a number where everyone is really happy, and then say, okay, now I'd like to talk about vacation time, right? It's like, then the recruiter's going back to the hiring manager, and you can damage that relationship, right? So, once you start talking, flexibility is part of the package. The benefits are part of the package. Vacation is part of the package. And you should be talking about all parts of it at the same time in my recommendation. Now, if you get turned down on one piece, it makes sense to bring up another piece that you haven't, had a conversation. You get offered that job at 80,000, you ask for 90, they come back and say, I'm really sorry, we love you, but 80 is the best we can do. Could I get an extra week of vacation, right? There's other things that companies can sometimes do, and it never hurts to ask. One thing the key point though, is when you are negotiating, make sure that they feel really confident that you want the job, right? Your interest level should be super high that whole time. And you're just trying to find, the package that works for you that can get you to yes. If you seem disinterested, and you're going back and forth on the money, they will lose interest in you.
Those are really good points. We have a ton of questions, and I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. And please, the moderators who are running the show, please let me know via the chat if we're running out of time and we need to stop. But some of the main questions that we had received before was any advice regarding returning to the workforce mid-career after a break? Any advice for the relatively mature person who may have worked full-time raising a family and now wants to transition to work professionally? How do you re-enter the professional workforce as an older adult? We had a lot of questions like this. So can you each just go around the table very quickly and give me a couple sentences of what advice you have for mid-career workforce changes and any advice you have? Let's start with Charlotte.
Sure. First of all, be honest, be really open and honest about where you are, but don't be apologetic. Be comfortable with who you are and what you've done, and be able to talk about how what you have done can make you better for that employer. And I think I talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of be clear about the skills required for the position, write those skills down, and make sure you identify yourself what skills you have and where you got them from. Because you can get a lot of skills from doing things other than the job you're applying for. And some of that's being a parent, or some of that's doing volunteer work. A lot of people who have been parenting and out of the workforce have done tons of volunteer work that require organization, that require marketing, that requires strategic thinking. And make sure you know how to talk about that when you're in the interview, because those skills do translate to the new job, but it may be something of a sales effort by the candidate in order to do that. But if they've already chosen to interview you, you've gotten over a big hurdle. So make sure you take that confidence to heart and then use it smartly.
Thank you so much. Melissa, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I just think it's important for people to understand that social norms have changed, right? I think from an employer standpoint, if someone's returning to work after a break, you know, like Charlotte said, be honest. And I think we're all people and we can respect and understand why people do what, you know, you're not someone who's undependable or flaky or lazy or something where it's just like, okay, we have life events that happen, or we have moments where it's like, well, I wanted a new experience, or I wanted to be home with kids, or I wanted, you know, to spend time, you know, working for a nonprofit organization, volunteering here or there. Like was mentioned, I mean, all of these things can be a good thing, and you have to capitalize on that. You have to showcase that, yes, I've taken a break, but these are all the things that I've been able to experience and accomplish. And I think it's a story to tell, and hiring managers and companies will be interested because you're being your true you. And again, not being apologetic, but being open and honest. And this is why I did it. And this is what I gained. And now I'm so excited to re-enter the workforce because I've, you know, been able to have this experience, and I've been able to gain this experience that will allow me to be a better asset to this organization moving forward.
Wonderful. Brent, do you have anything to add to the question about mid-career changes?
No, they nailed it. I just agree, address it head on and go from there.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to note, if we do have additional questions, I've received word that we can stay a little bit later. So please continue to send us your questions if you have them. We really want to make sure to address everyone's comments. This next question that we had was someone wanting you to talk about the challenges in the job search for non-native English speakers. Brent, I'm going to start with you. I know that you've dealt with non-native English speakers before. What advice or comments do you have regarding that?
Yeah, so that can be challenging. Obviously, it can depend on the level of English communication required for the role. You know, if you're fluent, but, you know, not native, it really shouldn't be an issue. I mean, it really should not be an issue if you're fluent in the language. If you struggle with the language, you know, it's going to be situational into whether that's going to be an issue for the company or whether it's not. You can't hide it, right? You're going to speak to them at some point or another. So what I'd recommend, though, is, again, like gaps in employment, address that head on, right? Because what you don't want is a conversation happening behind your back about your communication skills that you had no input in, right? So come right out and say, like, you know, I recognize, you know, my English may not be exactly where you want it to be, but, you know, it's improving, or I offset that here, here, and here. And this is why, despite those challenges, you still want to bring me on board.
Awesome. That's really good advice. Charlotte or Melissa, do you have anything to add about the non-English speakers? No, Charlotte? Melissa?
I mean, the only thing that I could add to that is, you know, like it's you, it's who you are, and you can't necessarily change that for the interview. Again, I think focusing on your skills and your competencies and why you'll be an asset to that company can sometimes, you know, take over and find, you know, that like, okay, like I think there may be a communication gap, but this person is so dynamic and their personality is so infectious that I think our customers will migrate and really grab on to them because they're so genuine and they're so, you know, so there's a lot of great things that you can showcase in an interview, even if, you know, your communication isn't perfectly English speaking.
Right. And national origin, ethnicity, those sorts of things are protected classes, correct? They shouldn't be discriminating against you, certainly, for those things. It's just going to be a matter of whether you can satisfy the job duties. Is that correct?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
I will add this, Rachel. You know, being bilingual can be a huge advantage. So
that's true.
Take advantage of that.
Definitely. Yeah, it's actually a big advantage to put on. Would you recommend putting that on the resume that they're bilingual?
Definitely. I mean, I work hard to hire bilingual people. And so if you put that on your resume, I'll find a job for you.
Awesome. Okay, what is the best way? This is another question we received. What is the best way to let potential employers know that you will be starting graduate school in the fall and you don't yet know your class schedule? Who wants to take a stab at that one? Anyone, Brent?
Okay. So, I mean, it's another hard question, right? I would encourage you to hold, sort of like a salary negotiator, I'd encourage you to hold that off until you get closer, not till the offer, right? But I would encourage you to hold that until they're really interested in you. Because if it's just a passive interest and they know like, oh, this person's schedule is going to be difficult, they're going to move on to other candidates. If they've met you, gotten to know you, fallen in love with you, so to speak, they're going to be a lot more open to working around that, right? Like, okay, she's fantastic and she has this. Yeah, her schedule is challenging, but how can we work around that? How can we find a solution? If you're just a piece of paper, they're not going to go through that effort to do that.
One thing I will add to that, and depending on the company, and what their expectations are, what they're looking for, maybe in the preliminary process or throughout, the initial stages in the interview process, talking about, if they value advanced degrees, because I've worked for organizations where that did not help you get promoted with the company. And as soon as it was made aware that they are more interested in focusing on pursuing their degree than their career with our company, it was kind of a disqualifier, where it's like, if they're going to be spending more time focused on school than putting their time and energy into performing on the job, it could be a deterrent. So, if a company values advanced degrees and pursuing further education, that allows you to know like it's appreciated and they can work around that.
That's really good to know. It sounds like it's largely job dependent and employer dependent on that question. I have two more questions. One is, how do you choose the best course for training, i.e., this kind of goes along with what we were just talking about, i.e. grad school, certificates, et cetera, when you have only 10 years left before retirement? Does anyone want to take a stab at that question? Should someone continue seeking education if they are closer to retirement, or maybe just speak to the difficulties of finding a job when you're close to retirement anyway?
Well, I would say, first of all, you should never quit learning. And I mean, some of the biggest problem with some employees is they don't keep learning, and it has nothing to do with age or how close they are to retirement. So people who are willing to be continuous learners and are have curiosity are the best employees. So all learning doesn't have to be some sort of formal training or school. There's lots of ways to get that learning. And I assume this person is needing to change jobs or needing to find a new career, and that's why they're looking for the training. There's a lot of training you can do outside of regular work hours. There's a lot of online training now, online degrees now. Find something that fits with what you're doing. And, a lot of people don't have like a set number of years before retirement. You may think it's 10 years, but maybe it ends up being 20 because you find something you love to do and you want to keep doing it, or maybe it will be sooner. So I would focus on where's your enjoyment? Like, where do you have some passion? What do you want to learn? Like, that would be where you should focus, whether you're close to retirement or not.
Brent, did you have something to add to that one?
Yeah, I did. So I think it depends a lot on the why. Like, to your point, why are you interested in your development? If it's a personal thing and a graduate degree would make you feel like you've accomplished something in your life, I think that's great. Go for it, right? If it's specifically for career advancement or career movement, I'd have an open and honest discussion with the leadership in your organization. Find out, ask them what they would value. Like, hey, here's where I want to be. You should be having these career conversations hopefully anyway, but here's where I'd like to be. How do I get there here, right? How do I get there? The other thing I tell people, and this is sort of tangential, but don't always think of it as a career ladder. It's kind of more of a career lattice, right? Where sometimes you're going sideways, sometimes you're going down before you can go up, and just think about it, from a broader perspective.
Wonderful. I have one last question, and I know that we've gone over time here, and I want to value everyone's time, but this question came in through the chat. Should someone wear a suit jacket during a video interview, or is that considered overdressed? What advice do you have for how to dress for the video interview? Who would like to start with this one? Melissa?
I can tackle that. And again, that goes into your prep work, right? It's doing your research on the organization and getting an idea of the culture and what the standards are and what the dress code is. My, rule of thumb, it's always better to overdress than underdress. But again, I think it shows the company, oh, wow, you've done your due diligence. You've really taken the time to understand our culture and who we are and what things are like here. So you can go in prepared. And you're just going to have a better interview if you have that knowledge. If you go into an interview and everyone's in business suits and you're in t-shirts, t-shirt and jeans, you're actually going to be very uncomfortable in that setting. But as for a video interview, and again, I never think it's wrong to be overdressed, but again, I think it's just you have to mirror the company you're interviewing with. So doing the best you can to research that. And at the end of the day, it never hurts to ask, what is the standard for dress for the interview process? I mean, at least they'll know and not just be guessing.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte or Brent, do you have anything to add to that?
Lots of people ask me, and I never mind answering to give them an idea. And when it's a video, you should also be thoughtful about your surroundings, so that whatever they're seeing in the background or around you also isn't distracting in some way, and that you know how to use the camera so we're not looking at the ceiling when we're talking to you.
Yeah,
Nothing.
I got nothing to add. They nailed it.
Okay, great. I did have one final question come through, and now I got to scroll back to it. This person is looking at a mid-career change. They've have 20 years experience in teaching high school, and they're getting a master's of education, and they want a job in secondary institution in multicultural student service, but this person is not a multicultural individual themselves. How do they get past that? That's a very specific question. Does anyone have any advice on that? You may not. That was kind of specific.
You don't have to be multicultural to appreciate the need for inclusion, diversity, multicultural issues. And so I think the thing to do is just jump in, like just apply and don't apologize, but show what you know. Make sure your resume shows what you know, and you as a person can show what you know, because that's what really matters.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And anytime you make a career shift, you often have to start at a much lower level than what you've been accustomed to and work your way up.
Perfect. Anything to add, Melissa? Great. Well, thank you all. Yeah, thank you all so much for being here and sharing your valuable insight. I felt like this was a very successful presentation today with lots of good questions for people that are looking for applying for jobs. For all those attending today, we will send up a follow-up email tomorrow in your email, so please watch for that. It will include links to this recording and as well as any online resources that we have available to support you in your search. You can also view our YouTube playlist for our previous career-related events. The link to that is going to be sent to you in the chat. Thanks again to our panelists and to the Office of Alumni Relations for hosting this event. Everyone stay safe and go Utes.